So one of my favorite features of the Jumpstart Pro Rails starter kit is the ability to generate an API client. So you can say Rails G API client OpenAI. This is the example, and this generates a client for you and also a test. Now, a client is really just a class with a set of methods that are in here for making API calls to a third-party API. So you've got your standard stuff that you would build if you were building your own API wrapper. And this is all really common stuff that you're going to build in most applications that integrate with third parties. And what's cool about this is that the application client wraps up a bunch of HTTP methods and handles pagination and a bunch of other things for you automatically. Really handy. And we are integrating against tons and tons of different APIs at Craftwork, where I'm working right now. And maybe that's to pull some messages from Twilio or from a chat service that we use called Podium, or if we're pulling some information down from some rapid APIs for property data, Google Maps, directions, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to build little API wrappers. So there's a couple different options when you do this, right? Like you could either install the official third-party client, which we are using Stripe by way of the PageM in this application, or you can write your own API wrapper. And what I like about writing your own application client is you don't have to worry about dependencies, right? Because your third-party implemented Ruby wrapper might have dependencies on some other HTTP client or something. So it's easier to keep up to date. Number two, sometimes those libraries are pretty big and maybe they include hundreds of endpoints, but you might only need to access one tiny endpoint and you're only going to pass certain parameters. So it can be a little easier to wrap it up like this. You also have a lot more control over the shape of the way that the client class works and things like that. But one of the things that I wanted was I found myself generating this API client and then constantly coming in here and being like, okay, I actually don't need any of these. And this is actually going to be called messages. And then that sort of breaks all these tests because now we have to come in here and change like anywhere that we were saying posts, we have to change it to messages. And anywhere that we have this base URI, now we need to change this to, I don't know, api.cjav.dev or whatever, like to go and backfill all the different pieces. So it gives you a good template, but what I was hoping for was like something a bit richer and following the pattern from Rails. I wanted to do something like Rails G API client OpenAI, and OpenAI has this completions endpoint where you can send a request to like api.openai.com/v1/completions. And if you send a post request there, it will do some OpenAI thing and give you back a completion. So let's take a look at how this is actually generated. I would definitely, again, recommend go buy Jumpstart Pro for your next project. Let's also look at the API client generator here. So inside of the API client generator, it is using the Rails generator's named base. So this is part of Rails's generator system. And there's actually quite a bit to how Rails G works and all the Rails generators. I find that using generators makes me move much quicker and it's really exciting. There's also a bunch of stuff that's built into Jumpstart. We're not going to look at it, but you've got like inbound webhooks and some other things. And then, so the way that this sort of works is that when you call template, it's going to use the templates that are inside of here. This is just like how Rails generators work. And so it knows there's a couple of methods that you can call in here for copying files or replacing files and things like that. And then file paths, these are all part of the generators. My sort of like fantasy driven development was to say, I want to do this and I want to have this completions endpoint there. And I want it to be a create call. And I also want to have the URL replaced. Now, this named base thing under the hood is using Thor. So if you're not familiar with Thor, it's like this tool for building command line interfaces in Ruby. So go head over, take a look at Thor. It's a really established gem for building command line interfaces. And there's a lot of cool stuff here. So the Rails generators are built on top of that. So we have this generator named base. So if we look at named base inside of Rails, we're going to find this class here. Rails generator named base inherits from base. And then, yeah, I don't know. What does base look like? Let's come in here and look at base. Okay, base is now inheriting from Thor group. So there's going to be like a bunch of commands basically that you can build inside of this named base. What the named base gives you is when you say Rails G API client, this OpenAI, this is the name. So by saying OpenAI, it knows how to take this name and do a bunch of different things with it using active support inflections or whatever to make it underscore or make it camel case or make it whatever, like all the different pluralized and singular and all that. So the named base is so that you can pass it a name. Now there's other things that happen in here. One of them is that this parse attributes method is called if the class responds to this attributes thing. And so if we look at parse attributes, and also it took me like a little while to dig into here and figure this out, you'll see that it's calling into this Rails generators generated attribute.parse and passing in the attribute. That's so when you say like Rails G model thing, you can do, oh, this has a name and that's a string and it has a description and that's text. So there's several different ways that you can pass these in here, but each of these are passed in as generated attributes. So if we look at this generated attributes class, you'll see that there is a set of types. So in the parse method, it's going to split each of those arguments on the colon, and it is able to grab the name, the type, and whether or not we said index. And so there's a couple fancy things that happen here, but one of them is that it checks to see if it's a dangerous name. So it also checks to see if it's a valid type. And valid type right now requires that it's the type that we're passing in is one of these default types, which is one of this list, right? And for now, if we wanted to update our API generator, we could say Rails G Open API client, we could say create completions string or something like that, but this would have to be part of what is in the list of database things. And I didn't want to do that. I want to be able to I want to be able to use like my own stuff, right? I want to, when parse attributes is called on my version of this named base, so this API client generator, I want to use my own parse attributes method. And this, instead of using the default types on this Rails generators generated attribute, I'm going to create a new class here. And this is going to be class like API client method or something. And I will have my own parse method that's going to take in some attribute. And then I'll decide, oh, the methods that are available are index, show, create, maybe update, delete, etc. And then when I'm parsing the attribute, I can do the same sort of thing. So I'll take like name and type is split on colon. And now we can say if the type is not valid, valid type. So if it's not a valid type, then we can raise an argument error. So let's make this method valid type. And this is going to take in the type. And then that went too far. Too far, GitHub Copilot. Okay, so we want to just see methods, do the methods include the type to symbol. And then we also want to check to see if the name is valid. And if both are valid, then maybe we'll initialize a new instance of this API client method. So we'll have this, we'll have an initialize method that takes in the name, sets the name and type. And then maybe we have attr readers for name and type, so that when we new up a new instance of this API client method, it will have a name and it'll have a type. And so the type might be one of like index, show, create, update, etc. And we could also check like, is it a valid name or whatever. But for now, at least we've got like a class that we can use. And then let's also look back at this parse attributes method again. And so we're just going to copy what's already there and we'll paste that in. But instead of using this generators generated attributes thing, now we can use like API client method.parse, and that should give us some attributes back. Now, by default, we're not actually doing anything with the attributes yet, but that should get us a little closer. So now if we just say Rails G API client completions create, let's see what happens. Okay, we got an explosion. Now this is saying undefined variable or method attributes. Yes. So we need to tell our named base about attributes. So if we look in here, Okay, so in the named base, by default, it does not accept attributes. It just accepts the name, which is that first argument we talked about. But if we look at, for example, the model generator, so I don't know where this is going to be. Let's just try to look for it. When you're on GitHub, you can just type T and that'll let you search around. So model generator, is that a thing? Model generator test. Okay. Ha! Raise, I should never be loaded. Okay, so that's in the test fixtures. So let's try this again. Model generator, and it's going to be in live Rails generators, Rails model. That looks closer. What does this models helper thing do? Okay, that doesn't look right. Let's look at div record model generator. Is that a thing? Okay, maybe. Here we go. Okay, so this is the generator that's used for active record. So I believe this is part of Thor. We can say there's an argument called attributes, and this kind of tells us about those attributes. So we can copy this argument and paste that in. Now, ours is going to be a little different. Instead of field type, whatever, this is going to be like the method name and then type or something, or maybe verb. I don't know, like for the HTTP verb or something, method name, verb. Okay. And then also we don't have a default now, so we can do that. Type if type.nil, we'll do like type is equal to index or something. And then also we can do like type is equal to type to symbol, because we were always going to want that to be a symbol, probably. All right, so now we should be able to pass in attributes. Okay. So let's rerun this and see what happens. All right, crashed again. What do we got? Adder.split, no method error, split for application client, API method, blah, blah, blah. So one thing, I don't know why, but this parse attributes method is called twice when you're generating. I have no idea. I don't know if that's like once for each template or whatever. If you're a Railsy, and then comment down below, let us know what's up. Also, quick break for our unsolicited self-promotion. We're hiring at Craftwork. So if you are looking for a Rails job, you have Rails experience, we would love to hire some folks. Yeah, hit me up and we'll get you connected with Mike at craftwork.com to get in the pipeline, and yeah, let's have some conversations. We're building some fun stuff in the home services industry, starting with painting. We got some cool stuff we're building out. So let me know if you want a job. All right, back to the regularly scheduled content here. Okay, so if we call parse, so if adder is an API client method, we'll just return adder. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know why it's built like that, but that's something I found like as I was hacking on this stuff. Okay, is there a conflict? Yes, I'm just going to say yes, regenerate them. And let's take a look at our OpenAI client. All right, so nothing changed, right? Nothing changed, but we do have, or we should have, some attributes now. So what's cool is that these attributes will be available in the template that's used to generate this. So now inside of the template, let's just pretend here for a second that we're going to do attributes dot each do adder. And what we can do is we can say def and then adder.name. And this should generate new methods based on what we passed in. And then here we can say like puts hello. Okay. So this attributes array again is going to be generated based on the arguments that we're passing in here. So we're going to say yes, regenerate. And now if we look at our OpenAI client, now we have completions. It's messy because my thing is telling us a bunch of stuff about new lines. Completions. So we have def completions puts hello. So this method is being generated based on what we're passing in. What's cool though is that like now that we have this API method class here, we can check to see things about the type. So maybe we can check to see like, let's see, let's make these instance methods. We're going to say, is this a create method? And the create's going to say, is the type equal to create? And if so, in the client.rb.tt thing, here we can say if adder.create, if it's a create API call, then we know that we're going to do some sort of post request, right? Because in the example here, create post, it's a post request to the path with some body, and the body is going to be the arguments that are passed in. So in this case, if it's a create call, maybe we have some title something like this: title, body, and maybe eventually we accept these sort of things too on the command line as arguments. But for now, this should get us pretty close. Now, when we're printing out the HTTP verb or method here, we want some way to do that that doesn't map to the Rails action names. So maybe we have like method to verb. And this is going to be like, yeah, index is a get, show is a get, create is a post, update's a put, delete's a delete. Update could be put or patch or whatever. Depends on your API. Maybe you have to go in and change that, but whatever. That's fine. Okay, so now we can use this method to verb constant to get a verb out based on the type, right? So now we can say adder.verb. That's going to give us this get, post, put, delete, whatever. And then the method name is going to be slash and then adder.name. Okay. And then we're going to have some body. And in this case, we're going to have title is title and body is body. And I know standard is going to yell at me about having these empty spaces, whatever. All right, let's run this again. Completions create. Yes, we want to replace it. All right, now let's go look at our OpenAI client. All right, super ugly, right? With all these dots. Those dots are trailing white space. So inconsistent trailing white space. Right now I have it so that on save, standard will rerun and reformat my page. But hey, pause for a second and let's celebrate that we've got a method being generated, which is pretty dope, right? And it's passing in the right stuff. And like, really, I think we just need to add V1, which is like trivial to go back and add. Maybe eventually we make it so that it, like, maybe this needs to be like V1 / completions create, and then we can figure out like, oh, we should actually call it whatever. We can do stuff based on the name or whatever. But another idea that Chris Oliver had was like, what if we had this so that you could do maybe creations, index, and then pagination or something, and that would add the pagination stuff to it. There's a lot that we could do from here, which is really cool. Okay, so that's getting pretty close. Let's do a little bit of metaprogramming because this sucks, right? We don't want to write create every time. And in our client, we are going to have there's going to be a different shape for the method depending on if it's create, index, show, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think following the same sort of Rails conventions and Rails patterns makes a lot of sense. So here, let's do our like methods each, and then we're going to use define method, which is a method in Ruby for us to dynamically define a method by passing in a string. And in this case, we'll just say create ? Index ? Show ? etc. That way we don't have to have this, and we should get like all of those for free. So I'm just going to say, let's grab those 4 lines and we'll make another one that's, if it's an index. So in this case, we're not going to pass any arguments in. Maybe we want some like query string or something, but probably that's fine, I would guess. Let's make a show method. And for the show, we're probably going to take in the ID, right? And this is going to be a /ID. Depending on the API, you might need like a line at the end or a slash at the end. Some might not. I don't know, like whatever, that's fine. So now we'll do update. So update's going to take an ID of the object to update. And it's also probably going to take some arguments like title and body. And these are really just going to be like examples, right? So that people don't have to guess the shape of what we're like passing in here. Title, body. Okay. And then I don't know, what's the last one is delete or maybe destroy. Do we call it destroy over here? Let's make this one destroy just so that it matches the Rails stuff. Okay. And yeah, that should have a delete method with the ID, no body. So I think that gets us pretty close. So we'll say Rails completions. Let's do index, completion, show, completion, update, completion, delete, and let's just see what happens. Crashed. Okay, invalid type. Which one did oh, it's destroy. We just changed that. Okay, but now we've got like exceptions that are working, and maybe we could look at it and say, did you mean this? If it was close or something, I don't know. Or if they pass delete, did you mean destroy? Or if they pass get or post, did you mean index or create or whatever? Okay, let's take a look at our OpenAI client. All right, super cool. So we've got a list endpoint for completions, completion with an ID, completion. This is going to be our update method. But what's weird is that now we have a name conflict, right? We've got a name conflict because we're saying completion and completion. The other thing is that like sometimes APIs will be weird and they might have, I don't know, comment completion. And if we were to do that with capital letters, like maybe the actual API requires that you pass capital C and capital C. But what's going to happen in our actual Ruby class here is that it's going to look very funky. Ruby methods, I don't know. I just don't like Ruby methods to look like this. Another thing we can do here is we can write like, what is our method name? So method name. And here what we can do is say name dot underscore. Okay. And then inside of here, everywhere that we're saying name for the method name, now we can say method underscore name. What that does is it makes it so that our API endpoint, like the actual text that's being passed to the endpoint, can still use that capital name because maybe that's what the API is actually expecting, but our Ruby methods should be familiar. So open AI client. All right, so now we've got this like comment completions thing that's underscored or snake case. And now like the actual API endpoint looks the same, but we didn't actually fix the name conflict here. So another thing we might want to do is come up with a prefix, and the prefix might be something like if the type or if create, right? Then the prefix is going to be create underscore. And then at the end, we'll do something like prefix plus the name, right? And then we might have else if the prefix is update, destroy, delete, whatever. There's another way to do this that is something I picked up in Python that I like to do when you're doing a bunch of if else statements. And it's also like, instead of using a case block, you can say prefix is a dictionary, and we're going to index into the dictionary in a second. So here we might just say, yeah, if it's index, say list. If it's show, find, create, update, delete. And then we can index directly into it right now with our type, and we'll get back one of these prefixes. And then instead of concatenating the string like this, we'll use string interpolation here at the bottom so that we can join on underscore. We could also have just done a join or whatever, but this kind of reads nicely to me. So now if we rerun this, now we should no longer have name conflicts in our method names. So yeah, now we have list the comment completions, find a completion, update a completion, delete a completion. Oh, if it reads so nicely. I love it. And we don't have any name conflicts. Yeah, I don't know, that's pretty cool stuff. The other thing we could do is work on the tests. So the tests are generating using the same sort of attribute stuff. I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. But one thing I don't want to leave for you as a reader is the fun of getting the URL populated here. So there's another feature of Thor called option. So you could say option and then whatever the option is that you want to pass. And when you're defining all of the commands in a Thor class for your command line interface, usually you say like the description, and then you'll have a method and it'll have some documentation about that method. When I was looking around the Rails code base, it didn't look like that's how it worked. And because we just have one command in our API client generator, we can say class option, and this is going to be an option that is available for all of the methods in here. And in this case, we'll call it URL. And this is going to be a string. The type of the thing is a string. We're going to have a default, and this will be the API base URL. Okay, so now what we can do is we can use that option by saying option. So here we can make like another shortcut method here, maybe def URL, and we can access that with option. And then in our client.tt thing here, when we're generating the client, now we can say URL. So we'll generate and spit out the URL there. So let's do the same thing, dash URL, HTTPS api.openai.com. And yes, we'll overwrite it. And now let's look at our OpenAI client. And awesome, it's got api.openai.com. Fantastic. This is super cool. So you can use a combination of these like little dashes in here to remove some of the spacing. This is like trims white space as part of ERB. All right, so let's see if we can clean up the output so that it doesn't look all garbly. And okay, so we'll start with that. And let's take a look at what that looks like. Oh, okay. So that added more space or something. I don't know. Or yeah, I guess it like removed some around. So this is definitely like a trial and error type situation. Client TT. Yeah. I haven't found a perfect way to do this yet, like to track down where to add all these. And also like it's probably when you look at these templates or whatever, the generator templates, like they're usually like pretty hard to read because just to get like all of the indenting right, like you want your class to come out right and it can just be a mess. We're getting closer. We still have some new lines that we've got to clean up, but yeah, we're definitely getting closer. Let's remove some more of these. All right, a lot of fiddling, but I think we got it pretty close. So the other thing I wanted to do is like if you pass in some arguments, if you pass in some attributes, then we will ignore most of the default stuff that came with the template. So if attributes is empty, then we'll render the rest of this stuff. Otherwise, we are going to just render the ones that are being passed in and created. That way, if you're passing stuff in, we're only creating the ones that you care about. Otherwise, we'll still give you the kind of like examples that you can follow. And what's cool about that is you can do the same thing in the tests. You could imagine, what I ended up doing is leaving in this me method because that is pretty common on most APIs, but also it's really helpful for all these tests. So if we look back in the client test for just a second, for example, we might want to change all of https example.org to this URL so that now when we generate this, we're going to have the right base URL in all of the tests, which is cool. So you could imagine following the same pattern as we did over there. But yeah, it was fun to dig through all the generators. And also, hopefully this gives you some confidence to dive into the Rails code base and figure out how things work. Again, go check out the Thor documentation. Very cool. Jumpstart Pro Rails has done wonders for us in terms of speed. There's a lot of really cool batteries included that are baked in there. Yep, so go check that out. The guides, the Rails guides for creating and customizing generators, these are really good. So you can say Rails G generator, Rails generate generator, and you can build your own generators that do lots of cool stuff like build templates and other things. So definitely recommend taking a look at these docs, which we'll link to down in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.